The air in the small Philadelphia apartment was always thick with a love that had no voice. It was a clean, meticulously organized space, where every crayon drawing taped to the wall and every framed photo of a smiling little boy was a testament to a deep, unwavering affection. Yet, the silence was the most dominant feature. A heavy blanket broken only by the distant wail of a siren or the rumble of a bus on the street below. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and casting long shadows over a colorful collection of plastic dinosaurs arranged in silent, epic battles on the living room rug. This was Leo's world, a fortress of quiet devotion built for his son, Owen. It was a home where every object screamed with paternal love, but the quiet was so profound it often felt like a constant, aching void. Leo stood outside the door, the day's grime and exhaustion clinging to him like a second skin. At 35, he was a construction worker, a man whose strength was carved into the muscles of his arms, but whose weariness was etched in the deep lines around his eyes. His posture, usually a bulwark of resilience, was slightly stooped, as if he carried not just his tools, but the weight of a silent world on his shoulders. He fumbled for his keys, the simple act feeling like a monumental effort after 10 hours of hard labor. All he wanted was to see his son, to fall into their familiar routine of quiet companionship, where a shared look or a small gesture had to stand in for the words he so desperately longed to hear. He was just a father, trying to build a life brick by brick for the boy he loved more than life itself. He noticed the door was already slightly ajar, a detail that sent a flicker of unease through him. He pushed it open gently, his heavy work boots silent on the worn welcome mat. And then he heard it. A sound so foreign, so impossible, that his brain refused to process it for a full second. It was a child's voice, clear and yet hesitant, slicing through the apartment's customary silence. "Maya, let's play volcano." The words were a physical blow. Leo froze, his hand still on the doorknob, his breath catching in his throat. It was Owen's voice, the voice he had imagined in his dreams for 6 long years, the sound he had prayed to God to hear. A sound that had never manifested as more than a collection of incomprehensible murmurs. His legs suddenly felt like they might give out from under him. Tears welled instantly, hot and sharp, blurring his vision of the familiar hallway. It was a dizzying, contradictory storm of emotion, a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated joy crashing against a jagged rock of profound, heart-wrenching pain. He had finally heard his son speak, truly speak. But he wasn't the one who had unlocked that world. Someone else had found the key. It wasn't a feeling of jealousy, not truly, but a raw, aching revelation that the connection he had fought so hard for had been forged by another. You know, life sometimes delivers its greatest gifts in the most painful packaging, and it's these stories of heartbreak and hope that deserve to be told. If you feel that pull in your chest, that connection to this father's impossible moment, please subscribe and help us share more journeys like Leo's. He took a slow, deliberate breath, his heart hammering against his ribs, and pushed the door open the rest of the way. The scene that greeted him was one of quiet, concentrated magic. Maya was on the floor, surrounded by pillows and blankets, arranged to look like a miniature mountain range with a prominent volcano at its center. She wasn't trying to teach Owen or correct his play. She had entered his world completely, on his terms. She held a large plastic brachiosaurus, making it nibble on a green blanket tree, while making soft, rumbling sounds. Owen sat beside her, his face illuminated by a look of pure, unadulterated focus and contentment. A small stegosaurus clutched in his hand. It was the universe Leo had always tried to reach, and Maya had simply walked in and made herself at home. His mind reeled backward in time, landing on a miserable, rain-slicked Tuesday 3 years ago. That was the day Sarah, Owen's mother, had left. He could still see her standing by the door, a single suitcase at her feet, her face a pale mask of utter defeat. Owen was just 3, recently given the label that would define so much of their lives. "I just can't do this anymore, Leo," she had whispered, her voice thin and brittle like dry leaves. "I can't live with the silence. It's like he's not even here." She hadn't even glanced at her son on her way out. That memory was a ghost that haunted the apartment, a constant nagging question of whether he, alone, could ever be enough to fill the void she had created. After she left, their life became a sterile procession of doctors, offices, and therapy centers. He remembered the feel of the hard plastic chairs, the smell of antiseptic, and the condescending tones of specialists who spoke in a language he didn't understand. They used words like spectrum, cognitive deficits, and prognosis, each one feeling like another stone being laid on a wall between him and his son. He would sit there, his large, work-roughened hands twisting in his lap, feeling small and powerless as they discussed treatment plans with price tags that were more than he made in a month. He was just a father. A construction worker, trying to keep his son from being buried under the weight of labels and expectations. Finding Maya had been a shot in the dark, a last-ditch effort born from exhaustion. Her flyer, tacked to a corkboard at the community center, was simple and unassuming. She was an education student looking for part-time work, and her hourly rate was something he could just barely afford by taking on grueling Saturday shifts. When she came for an interview, she did something no specialist had ever done. She ignored him and knelt on the floor, looking directly at Owen. She didn't ask about his diagnosis. She pointed to his meticulously arranged dinosaurs and asked, "Which one is the bravest?" Owen had simply stared, but Maya had just smiled, a warm, patient smile that seemed to say she had all the time in the world. Now, watching them from the hallway, he saw the fruit of that patience. Maya was a master of Owen's language, the silent, imaginative dialect of plastic dinosaurs and pretend volcanoes. She held a toy pterodactyl high in the air, making it swoop down near the Pillow Mountain. "The lava is coming, fly to safety," she whispered dramatically. It was then that Owen looked up and saw him, his father, standing in the doorway with silent tears, carving paths through the day's grime on his face. Owen's expression didn't change, but he slowly lifted his favorite velociraptor, pointed it directly at Leo, and spoke the most beautiful word in the entire world, "Dad." The sound was a key, unlocking a door inside Leo he thought was permanently sealed. He sank to his knees right there in the hallway, the strength leaving his legs as a raw, ragged sob tore from his throat. It was a sound of profound relief, of years of fear and silent prayers finally being answered. He buried his face in his hands, not out of shame, but to contain the sheer, overwhelming force of the emotion. Maya looked over, and her eyes held not pity, but a deep and quiet understanding. She didn't rush over or offer hollow words of comfort. She simply gave him a small, respectful nod, a silent acknowledgement of the sacredness of the moment, before turning her attention back to the dinosaurs. It's in these moments of total surrender that we find our true strength. If stories like this one, about finding hope when all seems lost, resonate with you, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful journeys to light. The days that followed were a quiet revelation. The oppressive silence that had once defined their home was replaced by a new, tentative soundscape. Owen's words were like rare jewels, offered sparingly but with immense value, a soft juice when he was thirsty, a dino roar during playtime, a night, Dad that Leo would replay in his head for hours as he tried to fall asleep. He began to see his son in a new light, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a person with a rich inner world that was slowly being revealed. He started observing the small things, Maya pointed out, Like how Owen always organized his dinosaurs by size, from smallest to largest, a detail Leo had never noticed. This newfound hope, however, came with a new and terrifying vulnerability. Leo's gratitude towards Maya quickly morphed into a desperate dependence. He found himself anxiously watching the clock as the end of her shift approached, a cold dread coiling in his gut at the thought of her leaving. What if this was all temporary? What if she got a better-paying job, or decided this was too much for her? He started leaving extra money on the counter, money he couldn't really spare, and making sure the coffee was hot and fresh when she arrived. They were small, almost pathetic gestures of a man terrified of the silence returning, of losing the bridge to his son's soul. His internal turmoil deepened as he began to grapple with feelings that went beyond simple gratitude. He started noticing the little things about Maya, the way she would bite her lip when she was concentrating on building a block tower, or the genuine, unforced laughter that would escape when Owen did something funny. He felt a powerful urge to connect with her, to share the burdens he had carried alone for so long, but he immediately suppressed it. He couldn't risk it. His life was a precariously balanced structure, and confusing his gratitude with something more could send the whole thing toppling down, destroying the one good thing he had. Just as their new routine began to feel stable, the outside world came knocking. News of Owen's progress had trickled through the grapevine of distant relatives and former friends. One evening, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number he hadn't seen in 3 long years. It was Sarah. Her voice on the other end was strained, filled with a detached curiosity that sounded more like a reporter following a lead than a mother checking on her son. She had heard Owen was talking, and she wanted to see him. The request was a punch to the gut. Stirring up a storm of anger and resentment Leo thought he had buried long ago. Against his better judgment, he agreed. Her arrival felt like an invasion. She walked into their small, love-filled apartment, dressed in clothes that cost more than their monthly rent, carrying a designer purse that seemed alien amongst the scattered dinosaur toys. She presented Owen with a loud, flashing electronic robot, a gift so completely tone-deaf that it made Leo's jaw clench. Owen, predictably, recoiled from the noisy contraption and from her eye retreating into a silent, watchful state that Leo hadn't seen in weeks. Sarah's patience wore thin almost immediately, her face tightening with the same frustration he remembered so clearly. "He's still the same," she muttered, casting a dismissive look at Maya. The air in the living room grew thick with unspoken history and fresh tension. Leo instinctively moved to stand slightly in front of Owen, a subconscious act of shielding his son from the woman who had shattered their world. Her presence was a toxic reminder of a love that had failed, of a commitment that had broken under the first sign of pressure. He saw the flicker of fear in Owen's wide eyes, and a quiet, protective rage began to simmer inside him. This home, this life, this fragile piece had been built brick by brick with patience and acceptance. He would not let her come in and carelessly knock it all down. The confrontation was inevitable, a storm that had been gathering since the moment Sarah stepped through the door. "You're coddling him," she said, her voice sharp with a frustration that had been festering for years. "He needs real help, Leo, not some college girl playing with toys. This isn't a life." Her words were aimed at him, but her dismissive gaze swept over Maya, who sat quietly on the floor, a silent anchor for Owen. Leo felt the old, familiar anger rise in his chest, hot and acidic, but he forced it down. He would not let her poison this space. He simply stood his ground, a silent wall between his past and his present. Seeing his refusal to engage, her cruelty sharpened. "This is just a phase," she spat, the words dripping with a cold finality. "Deep down, he'll always be broken." The word hung in the air, heavy and violent. Broken. It was the word she had used when she left, the final judgment she had passed on their 3-year-old son. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where all the love and patience in the room seemed to momentarily vanish. Then a small movement broke the spell. Owen, who had been sitting perfectly still in his corner, stood up. He didn't run or cry. With a slow, deliberate purpose that seemed years beyond his age, he walked across the rug, his eyes fixed not on his mother, but on Maya. He reached her, wrapped his small arms tightly around her legs, and buried his face in her side. Then, without looking up, he turned his head just enough for his voice to carry across the room, clear and steady, aimed directly at Sarah. Not broken, happy. Those 3 words were a seismic event, shifting the very foundations of the room and of Leo's world. They were not just a statement, they were a verdict. Leo felt the rage inside him instantly extinguish, washed away by a wave of profound clarity. He looked at Sarah, truly looked at her for the first time in years, and felt nothing of the burning resentment that had haunted him. All he saw was a woman trapped by her own limitations, unable to see the beautiful whole person standing right in front of her. A deep, aching pity replaced the anger. He finally understood that her leaving wasn't a rejection of Owen, but a reflection of her own emptiness. He took a calm breath, the air in his lungs feeling clean and new, his voice even and unshakable when he finally spoke. "You heard him," he said, the words simple but carrying the weight of 1,000 silent struggles. He took a step toward the door, his movement not aggressive but definitive. His family is right here. This is where he's happy. He didn't wait for a response, didn't need one. He walked past her, his hand closing around the cool metal of the doorknob. He held the door open, a quiet, non-negotiable invitation for her to leave their lives for good. She stood frozen for a moment, her face a mask of disbelief and wounded pride, before she finally turned and walked out without another word. Leo watched her go, and then he closed the door, the soft click of the latch echoing in the sudden, peaceful quiet. It was the sound of a prison door finally locking from the inside. He leaned his forehead against the solid wood for a long moment, taking a single, shuddering breath of release. The past was gone. It was no longer a ghost haunting the hallways. It was just a memory, stripped of its power. When he turned back, his eyes immediately found Maya. She was still on the floor, her hand resting protectively on Owen's back, her gaze meeting his across the room. In her eyes, he saw no triumph, only a deep, shared understanding and a quiet strength that mirrored his own. There were no words needed. In that single, silent exchange, a new truth was forged. They were no longer a father, a son, and a caregiver. They were a family, whole and unbreakable, built not on blood or obligation, but on the profound, healing power of unconditional love. In the days that followed, the apartment was reborn. The heavy silence that had once soaked into the walls was replaced by a comfortable quiet, a peaceful backdrop for the new sounds of their life. There were Owen's small, declarative statements about his dinosaurs, the soft murmur of Maya reading him a story, and the low rumble of Leo's laughter, a sound he thought he had lost forever. They fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing, a gentle dance of 3 people who fit together perfectly. They were no longer a father, a son, and a caregiver navigating a fragile truce with silence. They were simply a family, sitting around the small kitchen table, sharing a meal, and the unspoken certainty that they were finally, truly home. The love in the room no longer had to scream through objects. It whispered in every shared glance and every gentle word. 2 years later, the same living room was a testament to how much life can change. The space was brighter, filled with more books, more drawings, and the vibrant chaos of a happy 8-year-old boy. Leo and Maya were married, their wedding a small, simple affair witnessed by a handful of friends and a very proud little boy who served as the ring-bearer. Owen was thriving. He still loved his dinosaurs with a fiery passion, but now he could spend hours explaining the difference between the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods to anyone who would listen. He was the same wonderful, unique boy he had always been, but now he had the tools to share his incredible inner world. Leo's weariness was gone, replaced by a deep, settled peace. He had learned that true strength wasn't about weathering the storm alone, but about finding the person willing to hold the umbrella with you. Their quiet life took an unexpected turn on a crisp autumn Saturday. The doorbell rang, a rare occurrence that made Owen look up from the intricate Lego castle he was building on the floor. Leo opened it to find a young woman standing on the welcome mat, her expression a fragile mix of exhaustion and desperate hope. He recognized it instantly. It was the same look he used to see in his own reflection. She held the hand of a small, silent girl with wide, watchful eyes who peeked out from behind her mother's leg. The woman's voice was barely a whisper as she explained that she'd heard a story from a friend of a friend, a story about a boy who found his voice, and she had to know if it was real. She had to know she wasn't alone. Leo looked from the mother's tired face to the little girl's silent gaze, and he didn't feel the ghost of his old pain. Instead, he felt a profound sense of purpose. His journey hadn't just been about saving his own family. It had been about building a lighthouse. He glanced back at Maya, who was already walking toward the door with a gentle, knowing smile. In that shared look, everything was understood. He turned back to the woman, his own smile genuine and full of a warmth that reached his eyes. "Please come in," he said, opening the door wider. "You've come to the right place." It's a powerful thing, seeing how one family's story can become a beacon for another. If you believe these journeys of hope and connection deserve a voice, your subscription helps us ensure they are always heard.